Our scripture for today is from the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 13 through 50. 5 verse 12. It is written, I believe, therefore I have spoken. Since we have that same spirit of faith, we also believe and therefore speak. Because we know that the one who raised the Lord Jesus from the dead will also raise us with Jesus and present us with you to himself. All this is for your benefit, so that the grace is reaching more and more people, may cause thanksgiving to overflow to the glory of God. Therefore we do not lose heart. Through outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day.
For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands.
One thing you should have learned from me by this point is that occasionally I go a different direction than what I planned on going. When I first read this scripture, I thought I was going to talk about heaven, but then I thought, you know what? There's something else in here that we need to talk about. I think it's probably everybody's favorite subject. Change. How many of us like change? And I'm not talking about what we put in that jug either. I mean, we all like that kind of change, right? But how many of us like it when something unexpected happens? How many of us like it when something different happens? How many of us like it when we don't know what's coming next? You know, we like to be in charge. We like to know what's happening next. We like to know what's coming. For the most of us, we don't like change. But if we were to talk to Paul, I think that Paul would say change is necessary. And you look at the life of Paul, yeah, he changed. He went from persecuting Christians to being a Christian. He totally changed. And look at what Paul says in a couple of his letters. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Be different. Be transformed. We all play with Transformers, right? Well, our kids did. Some of us are too old to play with those. You know, take it one thing and you change it into something totally different. And renewing your minds. Again, make it different. Change it. Don't have it be the same as what it was before. And the reason for this for Paul is quite simple. Put off your old self. Paul would definitely say, as he did say, that he's the chief of sinners. He needs to be different. He needs to quit doing that. And I think that most of us would probably agree with that. That our old self is not always good. It needs to be changed. It needs to be different. So yeah, we don't like change, but you know what? Change is necessary. And some change is actually good. Ran across a quote this week. Our dilemma is that we hate change and we love it at the same time. Now, how can that be? How can we hate something and love it at the same time? How can we not like change, but yet we want things to change? Well, notice the second part of this quote. What we really want is for things to remain the same, but get better. We like change when things get better. We don't like change when things get worse. But we really like change when things get better. So you see, not all change is bad. And sometimes change is necessary, and sometimes change is good. And here in this letter to the Church of Corinth, Paul tells us about change. Tells us about some things that need to change. And he tells us about some of the good things that will happen when we change. This morning I'm going to focus on verses 16 through 18. And in those verses, Paul talks about three things that need to change. He mentions three different circumstances we're going through, and he says this is what it's going to change to. This is how it's going to get better. But before he gets into that, he gives us a word of encouragement. in the first part of verse 16. Therefore, we do not lose heart. And this is interesting because usually therefore refers to what comes before it, but in this case it refers to what comes afterwards. We do not lose heart because of this change that is coming, because of the way things are going to get better. As Paul writes other places, I press on towards the goal. Yeah, Paul knows it's going to be a difficult journey. He knows there's going to be troubles, there's going to be storms, there's going to be trials, there's going to be issues, there's going to be stuff we got to go through. Paul knows that. Look at his life, look at what all he went through. He experienced all of this, much worse than what we've ever experienced. But he says, do not lose heart. Keep your hope in Jesus. Know that something is better is coming. So in these 3 verses, Paul begins with a word of reality in each verse. He tells us this is what's going on, this is what's happening. It's not pleasant, it's not nice, it's difficult, it's a storm. But don't lose heart, because this is what's going to happen. And the first one, in verse 16, we probably all agree with. We're all dying. Oh, isn't that an encouraging word? Or I could say it like Paul says it. Outwardly, we are wasting away. Yeah. And yeah, we can't argue with that. We know that. You know, I remember when I was a young kid, junior high or high school, every Sunday morning when my dad would get in the car to go to church, he'd back out of the garage, and he was backing up. The only thing he would do was look in the rearview mirror. And he'd back up looking in the rearview mirror. And I'm thinking, why don't you just turn around and look behind you? But then I soon realized that turning around is not much fun. Turning around just doesn't work anymore. I mean, I think my head used to go farther than that, but it doesn't now. Yeah, outwardly, we are wasting away. As he says in the first verse of chapter 5, this earthly tent we live in is being destroyed. Yeah, we gotta wear glasses now, we gotta get hearing aids, we gotta walk with a cane, things hurt in the morning when you get up, things hurt in the middle of the night when you get up because you gotta go to the bathroom. Things are not like they used to be. We are all dying. We're wasting away. But that's outward. What about internal? I'm not talking about the organs that are inside, because yeah, those are all dying too. Those are wasting away. But notice what Paul says in the second part of that verse. Inwardly, we are being renewed day by day. Yeah, and he's not talking about our stomach or our liver or kidneys or anything like that. He's talking about our soul, about our spirit. If we allow God, God will renew us day by day. God will strengthen us if we read His Word, if we spend time talking to Him, if we fellowship with other Christians, if we listen to what God has to say to us. God is going to give us things that renew us. Some of you may not believe this, but being a pastor is not always fun and games. There's times when I have bad days. And mostly it's when somebody comes to me and says something that's not very nice. And quite often it's my fault. It's something I did. They're reacting to me, and sometimes it's not. But it's just there are times when I'm wasting away because of what people are saying or doing to me. But what has amazed me throughout my entire ministry is whenever that happens, when I have a really bad, horrible, terrible, no good, rotten day, someone else comes to me and says something incredibly uplifting, encouraging, and renewing. Someone will come to me and they say, hey, I think I heard God talking to me. I need to go do this. Or, hey, I think I want to go do this in the church. What do you think about that? You know, even in those bad days, when I'm wasting away, God does something to renew my spirit at that time, inwardly, day by day. Yeah, our body is dying. Our body is wasting away. When we're serving God, when we're listening to God, when we're following God, we are being renewed inwardly, day by day. So I encourage you to step back and look at some of these things and realize, yeah, God did that. God did that to renew me. God sent that person to me. God sent that card to me, that phone call, whatever, that interaction I had that lifted my spirit. That was from God. That was God renewing me inwardly, day by day. Verse 17, Paul begins by talking about difficulties. And like I said, Paul knows all about difficulties. He was beaten, he was stoned, he was shipwrecked, he was thrown in prison. He had all kinds of things happening to him. Probably worse than anything we go through. But notice what Paul says about his difficulties in verse 17. Our light and momentary troubles. And our response has got to be, are you kidding me, Paul? When you go to the doctor and the doctor gives you some bad news, is it light and momentary? When you go to work and your boss tells you you just got fired, is that a light and momentary trouble? Or excuse me, you got laid off because of, yeah, whatever, we know why. When you go talk to your best friend and your best friend says, I don't want anything to do with you anymore. Or your spouse, or your child, or your parent. When these relationships fall apart, are they light and momentary troubles? No, not at that moment. They're difficult, they're hard, they require a lot of attention. They require a lot of grief and a lot of sadness and a lot of pain and a lot of sorrow. But Paul says, keep things in perspective. Yeah, we got to deal with this stuff. We got to put up with it. We got to get through it. But there's better days coming. An eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Yeah, we got a lot of stuff we got to put up with now, but think about what we're going to get someday if we do not lose heart, if we remain faithful, if we continue to serve God. You think you got health issues now? And you do. But guess what? When you get to heaven, there's going to be no more pain, no more sorrow, no more crying, no more sickness, no more death. The health issues are all going to go away. For eternity. Yeah, we got to put up with them now until we die. We'll never have to put up with them again. You think you got money issues now? And we all do. We all want more money. We all need more money. We've all got a use for more money. When we get to heaven, we're going to be walking around on gold. That's how insignificant money is going to be in heaven. So it's interesting, you read the last few chapters of Revelation where John's talking about his vision of heaven. He doesn't mention anything about going to the store. Is there going to be a store in heaven? Probably not. We'll have everything we ever need. Everything we could ever want. And not just us, but everybody will have everything that they ever need. We don't need to sell something to somebody else. We don't need to buy something from somebody else. We won't have any need for money whatsoever. And relationships. Are relationships going to be a problem in heaven? You know, what causes problems in relationships here? When we got a different point of view. When I think something's more important than what you think it is. Or I think this way about a topic and you think this way about a topic, and that's why relationships fall apart. But you know what? When we get to heaven, there's only going to be one thing that matters. And that's praising God for eternity. We're going to get there and we're going to say, yeah, God's great. Let's worship God. Let's praise Him. And we're all going to do that. We're all going to agree on that. We're all going to do the same thing. And we're not going to have any relationship issues. Because we all realize the one thing that is important. So yeah, we're going to go through stuff now. We're going to go through difficulties. But better days are coming. And then in verse 18, Paul starts talking about our current circumstances. What we see, what takes up all of our attention. And he says, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen. And yeah, that's pretty hard not to do, because what we see is what we see. And what we see most of the time is not very good. But what happens when we fix our eyes on what we're going through now, what's in the past, what we've dealt with? You know, when we look back at our life, we take inventory of it, we assess what we did and the decisions we made. How many times do we feel guilty about it? How many times do we think, ooh, I should have done something different there? Oh, I wish I never would have done that. Oh, that wasn't the right thing to do with it. And even now, as we look around and we think about what we got to deal with today and what we got to deal with tomorrow and what we got to deal with this week, how many of us feel that we're prepared to deal with everything that's in front of us? We feel inadequate. We know we don't have what we need to deal with everything that's going on around us. But that's what happens when we fix our eyes on what we see now. We feel guilty, we feel inadequate. But Paul says, don't look around you, look ahead. Fix your eyes on what is unseen. Yeah, and we can't see heaven. We know it's been promised, we know it's gonna be a great thing. We've got a few images in the Bible, in Revelation, a few times that Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven, a few times it gets mentioned in other places. We've got glimpses of it. We've even got people who have died and have seen heaven and come back to life. And whether or not you believe it or not, the one thing that's common is they all say it's a great place. I've never heard from somebody that died and said they went to hell and came back. I haven't heard any of those stories. But everybody sees heaven and it's really great and it's wonderful and they want to go there. So we have these images. We know what's coming. We need to focus on that. We need to look at that. We need to think about what's ahead, not what's going on around us. We need to find hope. We need to not lose heart. We need to realize that better days are coming. As Paul says, we need to allow God to renew us daily. Yeah, God knows what we're going through. God knows what we're dealing with. God knows that we need strength and hope and the promise of a future, and that's exactly what He gives us. When we spend time focusing on God, when we spend time reading His Word, we spend time listening to Him, we will be renewed. When we're aware of what God is doing in this world, we will be renewed. For those of us who were in Bible school this week, it was encouraging. It was great watching these children run around and have so much fun, and watching these older youth help them to see what they have become. These three guys sitting up here amongst some others, seeing how they have been a great helper this past week in Bible school. That renewed my spirit. It renewed all of our spirits. We need to be aware of stuff like that. And we need to maintain our eternal perspective. It's easy to get bogged down with what's in front of us right now. And we got to deal with it. I'm not diminishing it. I'm not saying just ignore it, because you got to still go through it. You got to figure out how to deal with it. But somewhere, somehow, we need to keep in mind that God has promised us an eternity with Him. We just need to make it through this stuff here, and then things will get a whole lot better. We're going to go through trials. Paul knew that. I know that. We all know that. It's what we got to deal with. But you know what? The trial is not what matters. What's really important is our response to the trial. Came across a great science experiment this week, and I probably should have done it up here. But, you know, you take a pot of boiling water, and you put an egg in it. The egg becomes hard. You put a potato in it, the potato becomes soft. A lot of times, I'm not saying you ought to become hard or soft or anything like that. But we all go through these experiences, we all have to deal with them. How do they impact us? Because what we turn out to be says a lot about what is inside us. When we have God inside of us, when we have a hope for the future, when we have a reminder of the promise of heaven, we'll still go through these troubles, but we'll come out of them totally different because of what's inside of us. So no matter what you're dealing with, no matter what you're going through, no matter what your fear is going to happen in the future, my word to you is the same as what Paul says. Do not lose heart. Something better's coming. Please pray. Oh God, we do thank you for being a God who has promised us something much better. We thank you for being with us in these difficulties, but we thank you also for the promise that the difficulties will someday be gone. You are a great and a mighty God. We have seen your work. We have been renewed by you. May you continue to renew us. May we continue to put our heart and our hope in you. May we continue to trust in your promise of an eternity in heaven. This